I went into my most recent playthrough of Final Fantasy VI with this mindset that it was a flawless masterpiece, in addition to being my favorite game, well, ever. I played so many games last year that were incredible, and the quality of these games, oh you know, Persona 5, Bloodborne, Parappa the Rapper, led me to question how it would hold up against these modern titans. Aside from Parappa, that game's old. Regardless, I was convinced that Final Fantasy VI was still a cut above every amazing game I played in the last year, and I was right. Final Fantasy VI is an absolute triumph when it comes to JRPGs, and it should be used as the gold standard for just about every typical aspect in this broad-ass genre. But how does this game still stomp on its contemporaries almost 30 years after its original SNES release? Oh, real quick, I'm gonna be talking about the 2006 GBA version for the sake of simplicity and my own sanity, and also because it's just better than that original SNES version, sorry. However, that original SNES soundtrack is amazing and a lot better than the GBA version, so I'm going to be using that as the background music you hear throughout this video. I haven't played the Pixel remaster that came out pretty recently, so I have no idea if they remixed the soundtrack for that. I would imagine they did, but here's my scene if you want to buy it for me. What sets Final Fantasy VI apart from its predecessors in the series, and frankly its PS1 successors, is its structure. It doesn't clobber you over the head with a billion different tedious mechanics, it gets right down to business. In a word, this game is simple, which is great because it doesn't put a massive strain on my peanut-sized brain. An example of this simplicity lies within its growth system, which is present in just about every JRPG you can get your hands on. Your party members learn magic through attaching these things called espers, eidolons, guardian forces, whatever the hell you want to call them. This game in particular calls them espers. They teach you magic by just killing enemies. Admittedly, yes, this game uses random encounters, yes, they're a pain in the ass, and yes, it is a pain to grind out all the spells, but you don't really need every spell, come on, just check out Ultima. This one breaks the game, but it's really slow to get on every character, which honestly balances out its absolutely ridiculous damage output. To further add to this game's simplicity, its main story is set into two asymmetrical portions. This first half, well, kind of the first half, is set in the world of balance, complete with your basic green pastures and towns to provide whatever brief respite you may need. This part of the game introduces almost all the playable characters and is admittedly pretty linear compared to what succeeds it. Yeah, I know a lot of people despise linearity in games, but it really works for this first half because of its ability to flow well with the story, which yes, I'll get to in a little bit. The second half of this game is set in Ohio, the world of Ruin, and is where the former section's linearity is completely abandoned. It kicks off with this pretty hopeless and morose tone, but once you form a full party, the game says, alright, now go! And lets you re-recruit all your homies, in addition to 2 additional members of Final Fantasy VI's pretty sizable main cast. The game essentially turns open world in its latter half, allowing you to head wherever the hell you want to round up your lost party members, and then take on the final dungeon. This was extremely impressive for the time of Final Fantasy VI's initial release because of how many JRPGs followed a set story with set locations all the way to the end. And of course, that's not to say there were no side quests or freedoms in older games, but the Miracle Child, Final Fantasy VI, put a much bigger emphasis on them in this World of Ruin section. Final Fantasy VI has the biggest playable ensemble of characters in the entire series, and no, I'm not making that up. This game gives you 14 unique friends to work with, each with their own quirks and idiosyncrasies. The first person to show up is this green-haired lady with amnesia named Terra. She uses magic, which is not something that these steampunk people are used to since magic died out a while ago in this game. So she ends up being used as a war criminal for the Empire. What a bunch of assholes. Then you got my man Locke, a thief who hates being called the thief and valiantly protects every woman he comes across because his old girlfriend died. Pretty messed up. Moving on, you got Edgar and his twin brother Sabin, 2 very different characters, with the former being a white knight simp who pulls out his chainsaw sometimes, and the latter being a meathead who dives into a river at one point. Next, we got Shadow, this game's resident edgelord, but he has a doggy, and he throws shurikens. I like ninjas. Then, we got Cyan. Oh, shit, wrong picture. A master swordsman who talks like a Dark Souls NPC and reads classic literature, such as Bushido in the Bedroom. Yep. Some of the strongest members of the main cast from an enjoyable character standpoint are Celis, a former Imperial general who almost gets executed for treason and tries to prove the whole game that she's a good guy who hates the Empire. And Gao. He goes, wow! This is the best guy. Setzer is an airship pilot who pioneered Sephiroth's dumbass hairstyle, and he also pilots an airship, but he's got a gambling addiction. I think he's a real father figure. Strago and Realm are grandpa and granddaughter respectively, both having some of the highest magic stats in the game, and they're sweethearts, what can I say? Lastly, we have the final 2 characters you get in the latter half of this game, Gogo and Umaro. Gogo is that dickhead mime from Final Fantasy V that almost makes you drown trying to get his job, and Umaro is a Yeti. I like Yetis. Oh wait, I forgot about Mog! This is actually the best character in the game because he's a Moogle, and he dances. That's it. Oh, when he's dancing, he also falls on his face sometimes, poor guy. Obviously, all these distinct characters are a huge strength for Final Fantasy VI and contribute heavily to its lighthearted and goofy tone. Some other characters worth mentioning are Ultros, this octopus with dental issues, and Kefka, the best main antagonist in the series. I feel like it would be a huge disservice in any discussion of Final Fantasy VI to not talk about the music. The game's 61-song soundtrack is, in my opinion, its strongest aspect. This is Nobuo Uematsu's finest work in the series, and it perfectly backs every locale, every battle, and every scene in this masterpiece. He deserves a huge round of applause. Uematsu sprinkles this game with a bunch of catchy and memorable leitmotifs, and actually created a unique theme for all 14 playable characters. The dude went absolutely crazy. The soundtrack expertly creates an atmosphere throughout the game, using everything from somber melodies to bombastic SNES sound font orchestral performances. And it all culminates in what Uematsu has said is the work which he's most proud of, which is Dancing Mad, the game's 4-part final boss theme. The final battle in Final Fantasy VI plays out like an ascent to heaven, where you face Kefka in a legendary showdown. Rather than slowly crescendoing during its first 3 phases, the soundtrack becomes more calm and angelic until you get to the douchebag clown himself. And that's when it erupts with those crisp SNES drums. And winds down once you get this fake god to a low HP threshold, representing that the end is near, both in the fight and in the game's story. I give Nobuo Uematsu my Kid's Choice Award. Thank you for this incredible soundtrack. The story of Final Fantasy VI is the meat on its bones. It's not even convoluted. In fact, it's pretty standard JRPG stuff, you know, save the world, the bad guy somehow becomes a god, yada yada yada. However, this simple story, which, by the way, I'm not knocking, I think it's great, gets carried by a constant setting of atmosphere and a generally lighthearted tone. There are plenty of goofy moments in this game, while still delivering on more serious or sentimental story beats in spades. Right off the bat, you're thrown into this steampunk frozen mountain town while being in Ava's for some reason. You can tell this town, which is called Narsh by the way, is really dilapidated and has likely been the target of the Empire for a long time. This is how the hell you establish atmosphere in an RPG. Just to go on a bit of a tangent here, it's worth noting that Final Fantasy VII usually gets the credit for bringing the series out of the Middle Ages, and okay, while it's true that it got rid of all the aspects of medieval times, Final Fantasy VI was definitely the first to escape that age. You got these mechs, or they're called Magitech armor in this game. Magic isn't some everyday ability that everyone has. Why is this important? It's not, but I'll take any opportunity to criticize Final Fantasy VII. It's overrated. Anyways, Final Fantasy VI is the first game in the series to not commit to following one character in their journey, which is a huge risk in storytelling and pacing, but the boys pulled it off. To talk about a specific time the game takes these risks is fairly early on. The story splits into a couple different vignettes, or scenarios as the game calls them. These scenarios play to this game's strength of having such a distinct cast of characters. I know having such distinguishable characters wasn't new for the series, but it was still rare for RPGs to have an entire cast of fully realized characters that, you know, you actually care about. In these scenarios, 3 different parties round up more cast members as they head to a place for one Mondo battle, complete with doggies and this dickhead clown. The opposition in the World of Balance section of Final Fantasy VI is the magic-hungry Empire, with said dickhead clown heading up their operations. Oh, this game's my jam! All that good stuff is just in the first half of the game as well. This idiot Kefka betrays his boss in the Empire to line up some damn statues, and, unlike a pretty huge chunk of JRPG villains, succeeds in destroying the world with the power of these statues. Just a little bit of trolling. Of course, I'm painting the story with a broad brush despite how simple it is. There's a lot more nuance to it than I can fit in a YouTube video. This destruction of the world takes place and then a year goes by. Immediately, you shift to the perspective of Celis, who has been in a coma for the past year and is looked after by Cid, some dude who is in almost every main series Final Fantasy game as some kind of side character. He gets sick, so you have to feed him some fast fish to keep him alive. I hate catching these dumbass fish because there aren't enough fast ones every time you go to catch one. Anyway, if you keep him alive, he sends you on a raft to round up your friends, and if you don't keep him alive, well... yeah. This is how the game perfectly illustrates this toll that the World of Ruin has had upon our characters, and it does a great job of making you feel just hopeless. However, you meet up with your homies and stick it to the son of a bitch! The last part of the story I want to talk about is the Opera House. This is the game's crown jewel. This is my shit! The basic gist of this little arc in the story is that the gang is looking for Setzer, the airship pilot, and he plans to drop in on an opera close to where they are. Celis just happens to look like the star of the opera, Maria, who has fallen ill, and is forced to save the day while the others sit in the crowd. However, this rat bastard octopus Ultros plans to drop a weight on her noggin during the performance, which is a moment of peace and beauty in the game, unless you goof up selecting your lines. Oh, fun fact by the way, when I was in like 5th grade, I would just write down the lines in a notebook instead of, using the internet. I still have the notebook. Anyways, the gang has to stop Ultros in 5 minutes to save the opera, resulting in everyone taking a tumble onto the stage and duking it out with this purple douche. This is a perfect climax to the Opera House event, and the entire presentation of this story feels so grandiose and juxtaposed against the prior and future sections of said story. Damn, this game is good! Final Fantasy VI still feels fresh after who knows how many playthroughs, and is a testament to how an engaging and immersive game can hold its own against a modern giant. It's a landmark in quality, not just for JRPGs, but for video games in general, and still stands tall as my favorite game of all time. I love this shit.